she knew too well the ache of being left behind. The silence of abandonment weighed heavier than any spoken word. Yet in that emptiness, a new voice began to whisper inside her. It wasn't the echo of what she had lost, but the promise of what was still waiting ahead. Because when life seems to take everything away, the universe opens unseen paths. And it was in that very darkness that she discovered a strength capable of turning tears into hope, and loneliness into an unexpected love. It was the night before her birthday, and everything seemed to move toward an ordinary evening. The city carried on its rhythm, streetlights glowing along the path to her apartment, while she arranged small details at home, trying to push away the hollow feeling inside. Her heart raced when the doorbell rang, and peeking through the peephole, she saw his face. Her eyes lit up, and a smile escaped, as if in that instant all the pain of the past days had been replaced by hope. But she had no idea that night would not be remembered for joy, but for the beginning of a silence that would wound her deeply. The door opened, and along with the cold wind came the unsettling sense that something was wrong. He brought no flowers, no gifts, only a heavy expression and words that cut like blades. He spoke little, but it was enough to shatter everything she had believed in. Each phrase echoed like a sentence, turning all their shared plans into dust carried away by time. Her smile slowly withered, and in its place a wound was born, one that seemed impossible to heal. The hours that followed dragged on in suffocating silence. The apartment felt larger, colder, and distant. The walls still held the echoes of laughter, but now they stood as witnesses of pain. The coffee sat untouched, the bed turned into a desert, and even the mirror refused to reflect anything but weariness. Loneliness seeped into every corner, stealing not only the presence of someone she loved, but also her faith in herself. Days blurred into a repeating cycle. She woke without energy, shuffled her feet across the cold floor, counted the hours until nightfall, and when darkness came, the tears returned. It was like living inside an invisible prison, where abandonment replayed as a silent torture. Her pillow knew the weight of her tears better than any confidant, and the bed felt like a battlefield where she lost every single night. The pain went beyond her body, it reached her soul. Her chest tightened as if the air had been stolen, her shoulders carried an invisible burden, and even the laughter of others seemed to mock her state. Walking through the streets became punishment, for on every corner there were couples holding hands, families together, futures she felt didn't belong to her. The world moved on in color, but for her, everything had turned to shades of gray. On a cloudy afternoon, she decided to sit on a bench in the park. The cold wind brushed against her skin, the trees above swayed as if sharing her sorrow. With her face hidden in her hands, she let the tears fall freely. There, alone in the midst of a rushing crowd, she felt the weight of being invisible. It was as if her pain had no space in the world, only inside her heart. Between sobs, a thought rose in her heart: she needed a sign. It didn't matter where it came from, she just needed to believe that something greater existed beyond that abandonment. It was a silent prayer to the universe, a hidden cry wrapped in tears no one could hear. More than wanting someone to return, she longed to rediscover her own essence, to remember that she was still worthy of love. Maybe you felt something similar: the pain of being left behind, the emptiness that eats away inside, the feeling that nothing makes sense anymore. In those moments, life can feel cruel, but it's often at rock bottom that hope begins to rise. And if you've ever been there, write the word "new beginning" in the comments, because every ending can hide the start of a new journey. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, so this message can reach even more people who need to hear it today. With every tear that fell, something unseen was moving. The universe had not forgotten her, even though she believed she was alone. Subtle signs appeared: a phrase on a poster, a book left behind on a shelf, a song that seemed to speak directly to her pain. It was as if life itself was trying to remind her that nothing was truly lost, that there were still paths waiting to be walked. That night, as she returned from the park, her heart beat differently. It wasn't pure joy, but a spark, small, fragile, yet insistent. A sign that abandonment would not be the final word. Life still had more to give her, and the universe was already aligning answers that would soon change everything. The days that followed felt frozen in time, as though life had lost its rhythm. She woke without energy, moved through the house carrying a body too heavy for her spirit. The window revealed a world that carried on as usual, neighbors heading to work, children rushing to school, birds flying free. Yet inside her, there was only silence and weight, as if she were trapped in a place where nothing could bloom. Work, once a distraction, had become a stage of discomfort. The forced smile convinced no one, and every step down the hallway carried the sense of being watched. It felt as though everyone knew her pain, as if her face bore the mark of abandonment. Shame and insecurity blended together, and every glance became a mirror reflecting her fragility. At night, the apartment turned into an invisible prison. The walls held memories that refused to quiet down. Every corner repeated his absence, every object carried a weight she could no longer bear. The bed, once a place of warmth, was now cold ground where her tears gathered until the pillow itself became a witness to her loneliness. She tried to distract herself, but everything reminded her of what she had lost. A romance film felt like provocation, a cheerful song mocked her grief, even the laughter of neighbors pierced her heart. The world kept spinning in colors, but hers remained dim. It was as if everyone else had a destiny to fulfill, while she stood still, unsure how to take even one step forward. In time, even friends began to drift away. Not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know how to handle her tears. The silence of unanswered messages and ignored calls made her feel even more invisible. Loneliness was no longer just an emotion, it felt physical, as though it occupied space inside her body, draining her strength. She felt that the mirror no longer reflected the woman who once believed in dreams. The sparkle in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a tired and wandering gaze. Her face carried the marks of sleepless nights, and even her voice had changed, softer, faded, as if it had forgotten the sound of hope. Abandonment had planted a bitter seed inside her, one that grew in the shape of doubts. Was she not enough? Did she deserve this fate? Was there something wrong with her? These questions circled her mind like stubborn shadows, leaving no space for clear answers. And each doubt became another weight pressing down on her wounded heart. Her walks through the streets grew shorter, her steps slower. She avoided places where she might see couples, avoided conversations that might bring back memories. She isolated herself because she believed no one could truly understand the depth of her pain. She was tired of explaining, tired of justifying, tired even of existing. It was as if abandonment had become her identity. Not just something that happened to her, but who she believed she was, someone unworthy of love, someone condemned to live under the shadow of rejection. That belief seeped into everything, from the dreams she no longer dared to have, to the small gestures of daily life that had lost their meaning. And still, in the midst of all that weight, there were moments when a thin, invisible thread of hope tried to appear. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A memory of lighter times, an old phrase remembered by chance, a silent urge to believe that this was not the end. Her heart, though wounded, still insisted on beating for something beyond pain. Mornings were the hardest. To open her eyes and realize nothing had changed was like reliving the moment of abandonment every single day. Her body felt heavy, her breath came short, and even the simple act of rising from bed seemed like superhuman effort. Her heart begged for rest, but her mind refused to let her forget. And you, have you ever woken up with the feeling that the whole world is moving forward, while your life stands still? The streets that once felt familiar now seemed hostile. Every corner carried a memory, every path looked like a map of what she had lost. Even the sun, with its insistent brightness, seemed to mock her darkness. She walked with her eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding the gaze of others, as if each one could see the pain she carried. At work, tasks she once handled with ease now felt as heavy as stones. Mistakes multiplied, and every correction sounded like an accusation. The fear of failing mixed with the fear of never being enough. Time dragged endlessly, every hour another burden she was forced to carry. Conversations with colleagues became shallow. She answered with short phrases, smiled out of duty, and quickly withdrew into her shell. The world felt too distant, as if she lived inside a bubble of silence. She no longer expected understanding, because she believed no one could grasp the size of the hole she had fallen into. At home, the scene repeated itself. The TV played only to fill the silence, dishes piled up as a reflection of her lack of energy, the curtains stayed shut to block out the life outside. It was as if darkness had found a permanent place in her home, turning every corner into a reminder of her loneliness. Nights were the hardest. Silence cut deep, and every sound from the street felt too distant to bring comfort. The pillow became an accomplice to her tears, and the bed, a battlefield of endless inner wars. Sleep came only in fragments, and when it did, it carried restless dreams that left her waking even more exhausted. She constantly wondered where she had gone wrong. Had she loved too much? Had she given herself to someone who never knew her worth? These questions returned like ghosts, always without answers. And you, have you ever found yourself asking if the problem is with you, even when deep down you know you did everything you could? Isolation slowly turned into habit. She canceled invitations, avoided gatherings, even abandoned social media. Seeing the happiness of others was like salt on an open wound. And little by little, she began to believe there was no longer a place for her in this world. Her self-esteem, already fragile, dissolved even more. The mirror was no longer an ally, but an accuser. She looked at her reflection and saw only the shadow of who she once was. The light in her eyes had dimmed, her face grew tired, and the painful certainty settled in, that she had lost not only a relationship, but also herself. And yet, deep within, a persistent voice refused to be silenced. It was a fragile whisper, almost imperceptible, but it told her this couldn't be all there was. That life could not be reduced to abandonment and pain. The voice was small, but enough to remind her that even in the ruins, seeds of a new beginning can still be found. The weeks moved forward, but for her, time felt frozen. Each day was only a repetition of the last, a cycle of pain with no end in sight. The little joys of everyday life had faded away, and nothing seemed to hold color anymore. The world kept moving, but inside her there was only gray, silence, and solitude. Her heart carried the weight of rejection, as if it were a mark engraved on her skin. No gesture of kindness was enough to erase the feeling of having been discarded. It was as if life itself had written the word invisible across her story. And you, have you ever felt that way, as though your presence held no importance to anyone? Memories returned when she least expected them. A scent, a song, even overhearing someone's conversation was enough to reopen old wounds. Her mind built traps, replaying moments of pain as though they were happening all over again. And every time, it felt as if the abandonment had just happened. Her body suffered too. The exhaustion didn't come only from sleepless nights, but from the emotional weight draining her very life force. Getting out of bed was a monumental effort, and even the simplest tasks, cooking, cleaning, felt like exhausting marathons. Work, once a place of stability, had become a stage for failures. Her focus slipped, her productivity fell, and mistakes piled up. The fear of being judged grew heavier with each passing day. She felt incapable of holding on even to the little she had left. Friendships began to fade. Messages no longer arrived with the same warmth, invitations dwindled, and little by little she found herself more and more alone. It wasn't only the abandonment of love, it felt as if she had lost her connection to the world itself. The silence of others hurt just as much as his absence. In that state, comparisons became inevitable. She watched people starting over, rebuilding their lives, living new stories, and wondered why it was different for her. Why did it feel like she was condemned to remain in the same place, without the strength to take even a single step? That doubt haunted her like a ghost that never left. The mirror, once an ally, was now avoided. She couldn't bear to face the reflection that revealed how much she had changed. The dimmed eyes, the slouched posture, the weary expression, all reminders of a life in pieces. The image staring back at her seemed to confirm her darkest beliefs, that there was no beauty left in her, no hope at all. At times, even faith felt distant. She prayed in silence, but the words seemed to stop at the ceiling. Heaven was quiet, and her heart empty. God's silence was as painful as human absence. It was as though she had been forgotten by everyone, even by him. And yet, even in that desert, a small flame refused to go out. Fragile, almost invisible, but still there. A faint memory that life had once been different, a timid whisper that maybe it could be again. That flame was all she had left, and yet it was enough to keep a single spark of hope alive. Weeks turned into months, and still nothing seemed to change. Life felt frozen, as if she were trapped in the same day, replayed over and over again. The clock hands kept moving, but inside her everything remained the same. It was like living in an endless winter, where the cold never gives way to spring. People around her no longer showed patience. Some advised her to move on, others tried to minimize her pain with empty phrases. But no one truly understood the weight she carried in her heart. Every word sounded like judgment, as though she was wrong even for feeling what she felt. Her nights became marked by dark thoughts. At times, she wondered if there was any meaning in continuing. She made no plans, but the idea of giving up crossed her mind like a persistent shadow. The weight of loneliness and the feeling of failure had become almost unbearable. She looked into the mirror and barely recognized the woman reflected back. The dreams that once sustained her were gone, and the light of hope no longer shone in her eyes. What she saw was a stranger, marked by tears, with slumped shoulders and weary eyes. The question that echoed was simple, but devastating: who am I now? Some mornings, she didn't even have the strength to get up. She stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for time to pass. The phone rang, messages arrived, but she had no energy to answer. The world felt too far away, unreachable, as if she had been excluded from life itself. And when she went out, the emptiness followed her. She walked among people but felt invisible. Everyone had a direction, except her. The city pulsed with movement, but inside her, everything was still. That sense of being only a spectator of her own life deepened her despair. Abandonment had become more than a memory of the past, it was now the lens through which she saw everything. She could no longer imagine a future, nor dream of possibilities. Every attempt to think about tomorrow was cut short by the same conviction: nothing good could ever happen again. Faith, once faint, now seemed extinguished. She prayed in silence, but the words had no strength. It felt like speaking into emptiness. Heaven gave no reply, and her heart believed that even God no longer saw her. That spiritual absence hurt just as much as human absence. The laughter of others became unbearable. She could no longer stand being near parties, gatherings, or moments of joy. The contrast between her pain and the happiness around her was a cruel reminder of all she had lost. And so, she chose isolation more and more, just to avoid facing that painful comparison. And yet, something kept her breathing. A spark, tiny, hidden in the ashes. She couldn't name it, couldn't explain where it came from, but it was there. And that quiet spark, without her knowing, was preparing the ground for the moment when everything would change. One afternoon, when her heart felt heavier than ever, she left home without direction. She walked the streets as if running from herself, letting her feet choose the way. The cold wind struck her face, and tears fell freely down her cheeks. She sat for a few minutes on a park bench, but soon rose again. Just ahead, a small bookstore caught her eye, as if offering a silent invitation. She pushed the door open and was welcomed by the scent of books carrying the stories of countless lives. She wandered through the shelves, not knowing what she was searching for, until a title seemed to shine before her eyes: The Power of the Subconscious Mind. Her heart raced instantly, as if those words had been written for her. With trembling hands, she picked up the book and felt something special waiting inside. She flipped through the pages and found sentences that spoke directly to her soul. Words about the mind as a source of creation, about the hidden power within every thought, about the ability to transform reality from what we cultivate inside. It was as if someone had placed onto paper the very answers she had been silently searching for. With every line, it felt like someone was taking her by the hand, showing her she was not alone. The idea that her thoughts could shape her future opened her eyes to the truth: she was not condemned to abandonment. There was a power within her, forgotten but alive, waiting to be awakened. She sat in the corner of the bookstore and read for long minutes, drinking in each word like water in the desert. The more she read, the more she understood that the past did not have to define her future. Abandonment could be only one chapter, not the whole book of her life. The phrases echoed in her mind: you are what you believe yourself to be. The subconscious accepts what you plant in it. The life you desire begins within you. They weren't just words, they were seeds of hope, germinating inside her for the first time in a long while. When she left the bookstore, she held the book to her chest as if protecting a treasure. The sky, once gray, now felt lighter. The wind, once cold, now carried the sound of renewal. And within her, something began to change, the certainty that she was not alone in her pain, but accompanied by an invisible and powerful force. On her way back, she kept repeating some of the passages she had read. They were new mantras, unlike anything she had ever believed before. With each step, she felt something inside being rebuilt, brick by brick, faith by faith. She arrived home different from how she had left. The pain was still there, the exhaustion still present, but now there was also a flame burning within. It was no longer just survival, it was the beginning of rebirth. Hope, once timid, had found a door to enter again. The book wasn't just an object, it was a calling. A guide inviting her to believe in herself, to use her mind as an ally, and to trust that the universe always responds. From that moment on, she knew nothing would ever be the same. That night, lying in bed, she opened the book again. Joseph Murphy's words seemed even more powerful under the soft glow of the lamp. One passage said that if she repeated positive phrases before falling asleep, the subconscious would absorb them like fertile seeds. She took a deep breath and, with a trembling voice, whispered, "I deserve love. I deserve happiness. I deserve a new beginning." At first, she felt ridiculous. The words didn't match her reality. How could she claim to be worthy of love when she had been left behind? How could she declare happiness when everything around her screamed loneliness? But she chose to persist. After all, the book said the subconscious doesn't distinguish between truth and lie, it simply accepts what we repeat. The next morning, upon waking, she tried again. She looked at herself in the mirror, even without courage, and repeated, "I am enough. I am strong. I am capable of rebuilding my life." Tears came, but this time they weren't only tears of sorrow. Within them was a trace of hope, as if each word were a drop of healing flowing into her soul. She also decided to create a special journal, just as the book suggested. It was a simple notebook with a blue cover, but for her it became sacred. On the first page, she wrote in large letters, "My new life begins here." And every day, she filled it with phrases that expressed not what she was living, but what she longed to live. She wrote, "I attract a true love, one that respects and values me." She wrote, "I am blessed with joy and peace every single day." She wrote, "The universe is conspiring in my favor." At first, it felt like pure fantasy. But with time, those words began to form images in her mind. The visualizations came naturally. She closed her eyes and saw herself walking hand in hand, smiling, laughing at simple things. She saw herself waking up without tears, living days full of color. The more she imagined, the more real it became. And in her heart, a flame that had almost gone out began to burn strong again. Of course, there were still moments of pain. Not every day did she manage to believe in what she wrote or declared. But she chose not to give up. Every repetition was a seed, and seeds don't sprout overnight. They need care, time, and persistence. And she was willing to water her new life every single day. Slowly, she noticed small changes in her spirit. She no longer cried as often, no longer felt the same paralysis upon waking. A subtle energy began to rise within her, a quiet desire to live the day differently. It was small, but it was real. Deep down, she knew something was happening. Maybe it wasn't visible to the eyes yet, but within her, the ground was already being prepared. Abandonment was no longer a sentence, it was becoming a starting point. The book had given her the tools, but it was her faith in every word that began to move the invisible pieces of the universe. And so, page after page written, affirmation after affirmation repeated, she began to rebuild herself. She didn't know exactly where it would lead, but she was certain of one thing: she would never again be the same as before. As the days passed, those phrases that once felt strange began to fit into her routine like a ritual. Every morning, before even making coffee, she opened the blue journal and wrote 3 new affirmations. They didn't need to be elaborate, just simple sentences that carried hope. Slowly, she realized it was more than a mental exercise, it was a dialogue with her own soul. The mirror, once her enemy, became an ally in the process. At first, she avoided meeting her own gaze, but now she made it a point to look into her eyes as she repeated the affirmations. There was still pain in her expression, but there was also a spark that hadn't been there before. The courage to face herself was, in itself, a victory. Visualization became a sacred moment. Each night, she set aside a few minutes to close her eyes and imagine the life she wanted to live. Not only distant future scenes, but details, the touch of a hand, the sound of laughter, the warmth of an embrace. The more she allowed herself to feel, the more real it seemed. It was as though her subconscious was learning to believe with her. The habit brought an unexpected change. The negative thoughts that once ruled her were now challenged by new ones. When the inner voice whispered, "You are not enough," she answered firmly, "I am worthy of love and happiness." It wasn't an easy battle, but each day it felt more natural to defend herself from her own mind. She also noticed her body reacting differently. The weight on her shoulders seemed to ease, her breathing felt lighter, and even her sleep began to improve. There were still nights of restlessness, but now she could drift off while repeating her affirmations, allowing her subconscious to be watered with words of life. Small changes began to create small victories. A spontaneous smile in the mirror, a moment of gratitude upon waking, an unexpected peace during work. Simple things, but signs that she was on the right path. It was as if life itself was slowly beginning to restore color to her world. As the practice became part of her, something new blossomed within: discipline. She had never been consistent with anything before, but now she felt the need to commit to herself. Abandonment had shown her how painful it was to depend on the love of others, and now she understood she first had to learn how to love herself. The blue journal filled with pages written in hope. Flipping through it became an exercise in gratitude, because there she could see not just words, but proof of her evolution. Each sentence was a stone laid on the path of her reconstruction, a step toward a different life. Even when old thoughts returned, she no longer felt completely ruled by them. Now she knew she had weapons: her words, her mental images, her faith. She wasn't invincible, but she was no longer a prisoner. Each day, she claimed a little more of her inner freedom. And it was like this, quietly, that transformation began to unfold. There were no fireworks, no instant miracles. But within her, brick by brick, something new was being built. A new version of herself was being born, and this time, she wouldn't allow anything to tear it down. As time passed, she began to notice changes that went beyond her inner world. At first, they were almost imperceptible details, a lightness in her steps, an unexpected calm in conversation, a timid courage when facing situations she once avoided. Small signs, but enough to show that something was shifting. At work, the mistakes began to decrease. Not because everything had suddenly become easy, but because her mind was more focused, less tormented by thoughts of failure. Criticism no longer stung the same way, and compliments, when they came, were received with gratitude instead of disbelief. It was as though she was slowly reclaiming the confidence she had lost. Her relationships with people began to change as well. Friends who had pulled away started to return, and even strangers seemed to respond differently to her presence. It was as if her new energy, still under construction, was already being felt by the world around her. One ordinary afternoon, she caught her reflection in a shop window and paused. There was something different in her eyes. Not yet the full confidence of someone who had conquered every battle, but the expression of someone rising again. A look that said, "I'm starting to believe in myself again." Synchronicities began to appear. She stumbled upon inspiring phrases in unexpected places, people spoke the very words she needed to hear, songs on the radio seemed to answer her silent prayers. Little coincidences that, to her, were clear signs that the universe was truly listening. She began to take joy in writing in her blue journal. It was no longer just an exercise, it felt like an intimate conversation with the divine. Each word written seemed to echo beyond the page, as if it carried life of its own. And every time she turned through those pages, her faith was renewed. Even her body seemed to respond. The weight on her shoulders had lessened, her breathing grew deeper, and the aches that once clung to her began to fade. Her physical well-being was reflecting the emotional healing already underway. Her nights, too, began to change. Painful memories still surfaced, but now she could fall asleep repeating her affirmations. And instead of nightmares, she dreamed of hope, travels, encounters, embraces. The subconscious, once a stage of torment, was slowly becoming a garden of possibilities. In quiet moments of distraction, she would catch herself smiling for no reason. It wasn't a loud, overflowing joy, but a gentle serenity, like finding a piece of herself she thought had been lost forever. That subtle smile was a reminder that she was on the right path. Deep down, she knew these signs weren't mere coincidences. They were answers, small daily miracles, proof that her faith was being rewarded. The universe was beginning to align with her new state of mind, preparing something far greater than she could imagine. Her days were no longer the same. That heavy routine, once marked by pain and silence, slowly gave way to something new. It didn't happen all at once, but little by little, like dawn dissolving the night. She noticed that, upon waking, the weight on her chest wasn't as heavy. There was now a quiet desire to live the day, a soft expectation that something good could happen. At work, what had once been a source of shame became a space for small victories. A task completed on time, an unexpected compliment from her boss, a lighter conversation with colleagues. It wasn't just luck, it was the fruit of her new posture. The book had taught her that what she projected would return to her, and little by little, she began to truly believe it. Her relationships also began to blossom. A friend who hadn't called in months invited her out for coffee. A neighbor, once indifferent, now greeted her with a smile. These small interactions, which once felt impossible, now unfolded naturally. It was as though her energy was finally connecting with the right people. Even her body responded differently. She found strength to take care of herself again, preparing simple, healthy meals, and going for evening walks. The fresh air on her face, the steady rhythm of her steps, the sensation of movement awakened in her a forgotten vitality. Each gesture felt like a silent declaration of self-love. Her blue journal was filled with pages of hope. And one special day, while flipping through it, she realized that some phrases were no longer just desires, they had become reality. What she once wrote through tears was now manifesting before her eyes. The power of the subconscious was revealing itself. Coincidences turned into opportunities. She received an unexpected invitation to join a project at work, something she would never have imagined before. It was as if doors that had always been closed were now opening, one after another. And in every new opening, she recognized the invisible hand of the universe. There were also moments of testing. Situations that once would have crushed her were now met with greater strength. When someone tried to belittle her, she took a deep breath, recalled her affirmations, and responded with calm. She realized she was no longer the same. Inside her was a new strength, built day by day. Her faith grew alongside these changes. It was no longer just about believing in words on paper, it was about experiencing tangible results. Each small victory was living testimony that life was responding to her inner transformation. Abandonment was no longer the center of her story, but simply the starting point of something far greater. Even on difficult days, she no longer gave in the way she once did. Now she understood that every pain was temporary, that each obstacle carried a hidden lesson. This awareness brought lightness to what had once felt unbearable. It was as if she had learned to dance with life, even when the music sounded strange. And deep within, something told her that the best was still ahead. Those small signs and concrete changes were only rehearsals for a much greater story. A story of love, of rebirth, and of miracles that, little by little, was beginning to be written in her life. Days turned into weeks, and with each morning she felt closer to herself. She no longer walked through the streets with her head down, there was a lightness in her steps, as if something invisible was holding her up. Abandonment, once an open wound, was now becoming just a distant memory. At work, the way others looked at her had changed. The woman who once seemed invisible was now being noticed differently. The ideas she shared in meetings began to be heard, and even those who once criticized her now showed respect. The inner transformation was reflecting outward, and that gave her strength to keep believing. Her heart, though still marked, no longer carried only scars. There was now room for hope, for new dreams, for the belief that true love had not died with the pain of abandonment. That thought alone was already a miracle in her journey. The nights, once filled with silent tears, were now wrapped in gratitude. She closed her eyes and gave thanks for every small step forward, for every unexpected smile, for every sign from the universe that confirmed her transformation. What was once emptiness was now being filled with faith. In her moments of solitude, the blue journal became her confidant and ally. She wrote not only affirmations, but also accounts of her daily victories. Small, but real. Like the morning she woke without fear, the day she received a sincere compliment, the moment she allowed herself to smile at her own reflection in the mirror. Her visualizations grew even stronger. They were no longer just imagined scenes, but experiences she could feel in detail, the sensation of holding a loving hand, the sound of a voice that brought peace, the certainty that she was walking towards something greater. And the more she visualized, the more she believed it wasn't imagination, it was creation. She also began to notice how people around her reacted differently. Strangers smiled more easily, opportunities appeared in casual conversations, and even conflicts seemed to resolve with less effort. Quietly, the universe was showing her that it was on her side. Within her, a new feeling grew, dignity. She no longer accepted crumbs, no longer settled for less. She discovered that she was worthy of more, that life had reserved for her something greater than pain. This awareness transformed the way she carried herself in the world. And maybe you, listening to this story, have felt something similar, signs that life could be different, that a new season was on its way. If this touched your heart, write the word hope in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like, so this message can reach more people who also need this light. Deep down, she knew this transformation was only just beginning. But there was already something undeniable. The universe was responding, and each response was a reminder that nothing was lost. It was the rebirth of a life with so much more yet to bloom. The small signs turned into greater events. What once seemed like coincidence now revealed itself as clear answers. It was as if the universe had been waiting for the right moment to show her how much she had grown. At work, she was invited to join a new project, something that required confidence and responsibility. Before, she would have declined out of fear of failure. But this time, she said yes, believing she was capable. The outcome surprised everyone, and most of all, herself. She delivered more than expected, and that opened doors to opportunities she had never imagined. In her personal life, she also began to reap the rewards. New people entered her path, bringing inspiring conversations and friendships that strengthened her spirit. It was as if the emptiness left by abandonment was being filled with truer connections, built on the foundation of her new energy. Even casual encounters carried something special. A conversation with a stranger in the grocery line, a smile received at the park, an unexpected act of kindness. Each detail seemed to confirm that the love she longed for was already on its way, drawing closer step by step. Her heart, once heavy with pain, now beat to a different rhythm. It was no longer just survival, it was the feeling of truly being alive, ready to embrace everything the universe had to offer. That feeling followed her like a steady flame. The pages of her blue journal became living witnesses of her transformation. As she flipped through them, she saw sentences that once felt distant now becoming part of her reality. Manifestation was no longer just theory, it was practice woven into her daily life. Even her posture had changed. She walked tall, looked people in the eye, smiled with ease. The woman who had once been invisible now shone with her own light, the result of everything she had been cultivating in silence. Her faith had become unshakable. Not because challenges no longer existed, but because she now understood that each challenge was simply another sign she was on the right path. What once would have broken her now made her stronger. The difference was impossible to ignore. People commented, coworkers noticed, and even strangers seemed drawn to the new energy she radiated. She no longer needed to desperately seek approval, life itself confirmed she was in the right flow. And so, step by step, the promise the book had whispered was becoming reality. Her mind was now her ally, and the universe responded in harmony with her new frequency. What had once been only pain was now transforming into a horizon of infinite possibilities. The universe, which had already been sending signs, now began to orchestrate encounters that seemed impossible. On an ordinary afternoon, she decided to walk to the small park near her home to clear her mind. She carried her blue journal, where she had written her latest affirmations, but she never opened it. Instead, she sat on a wooden bench, her tear-filled eyes revealing her vulnerability, staring ahead and trying to make sense of her life's direction. It was in that moment someone approached. A man, with a calm expression, stopped in front of her and gently asked if she was all right. She couldn't answer right away. He then sat beside her, respecting her silence, offering only his presence. That simple gesture was enough to make her feel embraced in a way she hadn't in a long time. The conversation began timidly, with short phrases and shy smiles. She couldn't explain it, but there was something different about him, a serenity that radiated peace. Slowly, she began to share small fragments of her story, and he listened with attention, without judgment. It felt as if there was a silent understanding between them. At one point, he spoke about a difficult season he had faced, about how he had nearly stopped believing in himself. But then, with a sparkle in his eyes, he mentioned the book that had changed his life, The Power of the Subconscious Mind. He told her how those pages had helped him rediscover faith, visualize a new life, and believe he was worthy of beginning again. Her heart raced. A shiver ran through her body, because that was the very same book she carried in her bag. She didn't say anything right away, she only smiled in silence, as if the universe had just handed her confirmation. This wasn't coincidence. It was manifestation. It was the answer to every page written in her blue journal. She realized she wasn't simply sitting next to a man, she was in the presence of a living sign that the universe truly was conspiring in her favor. The encounter wasn't planned, yet it carried the perfection of destined moments. It was as though every tear she had shed had turned into steps leading her here. They spoke for a long time, unaware of the hours passing. They discovered similarities, exchanged stories of pain and resilience, and each word seemed to strengthen an invisible bond. It wasn't just attraction, it was the recognition of two souls meeting at the right time. On that park bench, under the soft light of the afternoon, she realized she was no longer alone. Not only because someone was sitting beside her, but because the universe had finally answered her most intimate prayers. As they said goodbye, he smiled and told her he liked to believe nothing was ever by chance. And she, with her heart racing, knew that sentence captured exactly what she felt. Chance didn't exist, only the perfect synchronicity of life responding to the call of her soul. And as she walked back home, clutching her blue journal tightly, a certainty filled her chest: true love had not been lost. It had only been waiting for the right moment to arrive. After that encounter in the park, her life took on a new tone. The emptiness that once felt unbearable was now being filled with something she herself had manifested. It wasn't only his presence, it was living proof that the words she had been repeating day after day, in the mirror and in her blue journal, were becoming reality. Every morning, upon waking, she opened her journal and read aloud the sentences she had written weeks earlier: I attract a true love, one that respects and values me. I am worthy of receiving care and affection. The universe brings to me someone who walks by my side with loyalty and love. Those phrases, once distant, now carried a meaning that felt almost unbelievable. At night, before sleeping, she continued the ritual. She wrote new affirmations and reinforced the old ones, always giving thanks as if she had already received them. That was what she had learned from the book: gratitude opens the door to manifestation. And it was through that practice that she cultivated the certainty love would arrive, even when it seemed impossible. When she looked at him, it felt like seeing the materialization of every line she had written. The way he listened, the respect in his words, the serenity of his presence, everything reflected what she had envisioned so many times in her mind and in her heart. This wasn't coincidence. This was manifestation. During one of their conversations about dreams, he spoke again about the book. He shared how he repeated phrases before sleeping, how he too kept a journal where he wrote down positive thoughts. She smiled inwardly, recognizing the perfect synchronicity. He spoke of practices that were exactly the same as hers, without realizing that their spiritual paths had been aligned long before they met. The blue journal was no longer just a space for desires, it had become a diary of testimonies. She wrote not only what she wished for, but also what was already unfolding: the return of hope, shared smiles, the signs of care she was receiving. Each page was proof that the universe faithfully responds to those who believe. This process had brought her more than a relationship. It had brought the confidence that she was not at the mercy of chance. She discovered that by aligning thoughts, words, and feelings, she could create a life completely different from the one scarred by abandonment. Her friends noticed the change in her gaze. It wasn't only the sparkle of someone in love, but the confidence of someone who had learned to be a partner in her own destiny. And that confidence came from simple, consistent practices: writing, affirming, visualizing, and believing. Her work also reflected this new energy. She no longer feared speaking up, she presented her ideas with conviction, and opportunities arose as a natural consequence of her new posture. Just like in love, she discovered that everything planted with faith and consistency eventually blossomed. Deep down, she knew she hadn't just found a companion. She had found confirmation that the universe responds to those who dare to believe. And with every page written in her blue journal, she reaffirmed, I deserve. I receive. I live the love I have manifested. As the weeks went by, she realized that the love that had appeared wasn't only a gift from the universe, but also confirmation that her inner discipline was working. The blue journal, once filled with solitary words, was now becoming a space of celebration and continuity. She didn't stop writing. On the contrary, she intensified the habit, like watering a plant that had already begun to bloom. Every morning, right beside the bed, she opened its pages and wrote affirmations that went beyond love. She wrote, I live a healthy relationship, full of respect and tenderness. She also wrote, I prosper in every area of my life. And, I am guided by the universe toward paths of abundance and fulfillment. These weren't just requests, they were declarations of trust in a life already transforming. With him, she felt safe enough to share some of those thoughts. She spoke about giving thanks before sleeping, about repeating positive phrases upon waking. To her surprise, he didn't just agree, he shared his own practices too. That harmony strengthened their bond and built a foundation rooted in faith and purpose. With each meeting, she noticed her desires taking form. He showed exactly the qualities she had written about so many times in the journal: patience, care, loyalty. It was as if the universe had read every line and chosen someone who reflected that love word for word. That recognition inspired her to go further. If she had manifested such an aligned love, why not also call in prosperity, health, and new opportunities? Her pages began to hold bolder affirmations: I am prosperous. My life is rich with fulfillment. Everything I do flourishes. The reflection of that confidence was visible. Her workdays grew more productive, her energy more vibrant, her posture more assured. People around her noticed the difference and wanted to know what had changed. She smiled, keeping, in gentle silence, the secret that was no longer a secret: the power of a mind aligned with the heart. The blue journal was no longer just a storehouse of words, it had become a map of achievements. Each page seemed to turn into reality before her eyes. And that motivated her to keep writing, even when life felt steady. She had learned that manifestation isn't only about transforming pain, it's also about expanding joy. Love, once only a desire, now walked beside her like a certainty. And that certainty fueled her to dream even bigger, knowing the same universe that brought a partner was ready to open every other door. Each night, she whispered, I am loved, I am prosperous, I am whole. And every time she spoke those words, she felt the universe smile back, confirming she was exactly where she needed to be. So her life stopped being only a story of pain overcome and became a journey of continual expansion, where every written affirmation turned into a living page of her transformation. Love had become a living reality, but she knew her journey didn't end there. The pages of the blue journal began to hold even greater dreams, as if every victory were an invitation to reach higher. She wrote, I build my financial independence. My professional life blossoms with abundance. I am guided to opportunities that elevate me. These words were seeds, and she had already learned that every seed blooms in its perfect time. At work, the reflections of her new energy multiplied. Projects that once seemed out of reach were now becoming concrete invitations. Colleagues asked for her opinion, leaders recognized her skills, and for the first time in a long while, she felt worthy of holding a place of significance. She was no longer the woman who hid, she was the woman who shone with confidence. Her relationship with him also fueled these changes. They spoke at length about dreams, about future plans, and discovered affinities that went far beyond affection. He encouraged her to believe in her potential, to see that she could achieve much more than she imagined. That support became fuel for turning ideas into action. It was during one of these conversations that the inspiration came to start something of her own. A small idea, scribbled among the pages of the blue journal: I am capable of creating a business that transforms lives. At first, it felt distant, but when she spoke it out loud, she realized that desire carried power. He smiled and told her he believed in her. That vote of confidence ignited her determination even more. Her practices of affirmations and visualizations continued to be her foundation. Every morning, beyond giving thanks for the love she already had, she also visualized prosperity, smiling clients, doors opening, her finances flourishing. The more she felt that reality in her heart, the more she believed it wasn't imagination, it was preparation. And the signs appeared. Unexpected opportunities began to arise: invitations to join entrepreneurship groups, encounters with people who carried similar ideas, even collaboration proposals. It was as though the universe conspired to open paths she never could have found alone. With each page she wrote, she realized she was no longer afraid to dream big. She had learned she didn't need to limit herself to what she had already achieved. If she had attracted true love, why couldn't she also attract a life filled with abundance? The universe, after all, knows no limits. Her heart, once scarred by abandonment, now pulsed with hope and courage. What had once been survival was now the building of a future. And in that future, she didn't see just stability, but expansion, a calling to become the best version of herself. Friends and family began to notice how she spoke with excitement, how her eyes shone when she described her projects. She was no longer the broken woman crushed by pain. She was a woman rising, aware that her life was only just beginning. And in silence, she gave thanks for every step. Because she knew she wasn't only achieving external things, she was living proof that inner transformation can open doors that once seemed impossible. And that certainty, to her, was the greatest of miracles. What began as scribbled words in a blue journal was now turning into fruits no one could ignore. Love was strong, her professional life was flourishing, and her dreams of prosperity were no longer just repeated phrases, they were taking form before her very eyes. But the universe still had more in store. One day, she was invited to share her story with a small group of women who had also faced abandonment and rejection. At first, she hesitated. She thought her journey wasn't grand enough to be told. But as she remembered her written affirmations, she realized that this was her moment to expand. With her heart racing, she accepted the invitation. At that gathering, she spoke about the days of loneliness, about the emptiness that had seemed endless, but also about how she discovered the strength of words and the power of the subconscious. She shared passages from her blue journal, phrases that seemed simple yet had completely transformed her life. As she spoke, she noticed something extraordinary: the eyes of those women filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of recognition. They saw in her story the reflection of their own battles. They felt that if she had made it through, they could too. That moment became a turning point. What was meant to be a simple meeting soon became a calling. Others began reaching out, wanting to hear her story, asking for advice, eager to learn about the practices that had reshaped her life. Almost without realizing it, she had become a voice of hope. Invitations began to appear unexpectedly: small groups, church gatherings, community events. Each time she shared her story, more people connected, more lives were touched. And with every word, she reminded herself that it had all started with sentences written alone in a blue journal. She had never imagined speaking in public, yet now she felt guided by a higher force. Her words didn't come only from her mind but from her heart. And it was that truth that allowed her message to reach so deeply. Her relationship with him also grew stronger through this process. He accompanied her to some of the events, celebrated every achievement, and reminded her that she was living proof of the power of the subconscious. There was no greater pride than seeing her light recognized by others. For her, each invitation was more than just an opportunity. It was confirmation that her pain had not been in vain. Abandonment had become testimony, loneliness had become inspiration, and the pages of her blue journal had become seeds now blooming in many other lives. And in silence, she gave thanks to the universe for every person who crossed her path, because she knew she was living not only for herself, but as an instrument to remind others that transformation is possible. What had begun in small gatherings soon grew into something larger. The stories she shared were no longer confined to intimate circles, now they spread outward. People who had attended her first talks posted about her on social media, recommended her for new events, and little by little, her name began to circulate as someone carrying a message of transformation. Then came a special invitation, unexpected and humbling, to speak at a local conference on resilience and faith. Her heart raced the moment she read the email. She had never imagined standing on a stage before so many people, but the memory of her blue journal encouraged her. How many times had she written, "I inspire others with my story"? Now, that sentence was becoming reality. On the night of the conference, she looked out at the packed auditorium and felt her hands tremble. But as soon as she began to speak, she realized she was not alone. The same universe that had guided her to that moment was also holding her steady. The words flowed naturally, and each story found its echo in the hearts that listened. Many wept, others smiled with hope, and all could feel they were in the presence of someone speaking straight from the soul. After her talk, a line began to form. People wanted to thank her, take photos, share their own stories. Every hug she received was confirmation that her journey of pain and rebirth had become a guiding light for many. In that moment, she understood she had found her purpose. Interviews soon followed. Radio shows, YouTube channels, local newspapers all wanted to share her story. And in every opportunity, she made sure to speak about the power of affirmations, of faith, and of discipline. She spoke of the blue journal as if it were a silent friend that had walked with her through every step, and encouraged everyone to create one of their own. Her life, once marked by abandonment, had now become a symbol of hope. What once seemed impossible had turned into testimony. And with every word, she reinforced that it wasn't about luck, it was about believing, planting, and persisting. Love grew alongside this new chapter. He celebrated every achievement, and his steady support was an anchor of security. When she was applauded on stage, she knew she wasn't harvesting alone. Those moments were the fruit of everything they had shared, including their quiet faith in the power of the subconscious. The transformation was undeniable. Not only in her smile, but in the glow in her eyes, the strength in her posture, the energy she radiated. She was no longer just a woman rebuilt, she was a woman rising, inspiring crowds to believe they could rise too. And so, almost naturally, invitations began arriving from other cities, expanding her reach and carrying with her a message that wasn't only her own, but of the universe that had transformed her so she could help transform others. Deep down, every step she took was filled with profound gratitude. Because she knew that in the silent midnights when she wrote in her blue journal, she was creating not only a new life for herself, but a mission capable of lighting the way for thousands. What once seemed unimaginable was now becoming her reality. Full auditoriums awaited her voice, and each presentation was received with anticipation and emotion. People didn't come just to hear a lecture, they came to feel the energy of someone who had turned pain into victory and loneliness into love. Every time she stepped on stage, she remembered where it had begun, the abandonment, the silent tears, the nights spent writing in her blue journal, believing in something she could not yet see. And that was exactly what she shared. She didn't speak as someone distant from reality, but as a woman who had lived through the pain and now proved that change was possible. Crowds were moved because they felt truth in every word. When she spoke of affirmations repeated in front of the mirror, many saw themselves in that same struggle to believe. When she showed pages of her blue journal, with simple phrases like, "I deserve to be loved," and "I attract abundance," the audience's eyes lit up. In that moment, everyone understood, it wasn't magic, it was faith in action. Through interviews, her story spread even further. Magazines, television channels, digital platforms, all wanted to know how someone once broken by pain had managed to reinvent herself and become an inspiration. She always answered with humility, "I simply wrote, believed, and persisted. The universe did the rest." The love by her side was also part of this testimony. He accompanied her on many trips, supported her every step, and when he looked at her standing before hundreds of people, he saw the woman who had manifested a new life with courage and persistence. Their partnership was itself a reflection of the power of attraction. And it wasn't only the people present at her events who were being transformed. Messages of gratitude arrived from different places, from people who had applied her guidance, created their own affirmation journals, and begun to see change in their lives. This current of hope grew without stopping. For her, the stage was not a place of exaltation, but of service. She felt that every word she spoke was a seed planted in hearts that might have been trapped in the same despair that once crushed her. And knowing she could be a bridge for others' transformation was the greatest reward of all. At every new event, she reinforced the central message, that no one is condemned to abandonment, to scarcity, or to pain. That within every person lies a silent power, waiting only to be activated through faith, discipline, and love. And maybe you, hearing this story now, have felt something stir within you. If you've ever walked through loneliness, if you've ever longed for a new beginning, write the word transformation in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, so this message can reach even more people who need to believe in the power that also lives within them. Because, at its core, her story isn't just hers. It is a mirror of what anyone can live when they choose to believe and align with the universe. Her journey, which began in tears and solitude, had now become living proof that nothing is final when you choose to believe. Abandonment was not the end, but the beginning of a story of rebirth. The blue journal, which once held phrases written in pain, had now become a symbol of victory and hope. She came to understand that the universe always responds, but the key had been within her all along. It wasn't chance that brought new love, nor luck that opened professional doors, but the courageous decision to change her mind, align her thoughts, and believe she was worthy of more. Looking back, she saw not only suffering, but the very steps that had carried her here. Every tear shed had turned into strength, every lonely night had become the seed of a new dawn. Today, holding the hand of the one walking by her side and speaking before multitudes, she knew the entire process had been worth it. And this was not only her story, it was an invitation to everyone listening. Because the same power that lifted her up also lives within each person hearing this now. The power to believe, to write, to visualize, to persist, until life itself responds. Maybe you too have blank pages waiting to be filled. Maybe there are dreams that feel distant, but are only waiting for your permission to bloom. The universe does not deny possibilities, it simply waits for your decision to make room for them. Her story proves that no one is condemned to live in pain forever. There is always a chance to begin again, to rebuild, to turn wounds into testimonies. What looks like ruins today can become the foundation of a new life. And if this message has touched your heart, remember, you can too. You can choose to begin today, to take the first step, to write your own story of transformation. It all begins with one simple decision, to believe it is possible. Write the word miracles in the comments, declaring that you are ready to live the extraordinary in your life. Subscribe to the channel, share this story with someone who needs hope, and allow this current of faith to keep reaching more and more people. Because in the end, this is not only about a woman who overcame abandonment. It is an eternal reminder, when you connect with the universe, when you cultivate faith and discipline, the impossible becomes only the beginning of something greater. And just as she transformed her life, you too can transform yours. The power is already within you. And remember, there is always hope. See you in the next story.